Som utdannet psykolog fikk Neil Mercer tidlig interesse for utviklingen av barns tenkning. Og alle dere som er her i dag, dere kjenner sikkert til resultatene av dette tidlige fokuset på samspillets betydning for læring. I dag er han professor emeritus ved Cambridge University og direktør for Rsc at Cambridge-senteret. Mercer følger alle innledningene her i dag via tolk og får med seg alt som blir sagt, slik at han kan dra nytte av det senere i dag. Så, without further ado, Professor Neil Mercer, find your way to the stage, please. And everyone just cheer him up. Thank you.
Great. Good morning. Very nice to be here. Partly it's nice to be here to see the snow, because we don't get much snow anymore. When I was a child, the lakes used to freeze over and there was a lot more snow, but we don't get it because of climate change. Climate change is real, despite Donald Trump claiming it's a Chinese conspiracy, but it is real, we all know that. But some changes are for the better, and I think one of the things that has really improved in recent years is our understanding of the processes of education. And I do think, as the Minister said, we should be using what we know to put into practice in classrooms and schools. And I think we are doing that in lots of places. But there's still quite a long way to go. I mean, I thought his words were very reassuring. I said to him just before he left, I wish he was the Minister in England, because I don't think people there are quite so keen on taking account of education research. So I'm going to talk about 21st century education in 35 minutes, right? Obviously, I'll cover it all, yeah. I'll talk very fast. No, I won't talk very fast. But what I will do is, once I've got this thing to work, two related questions, two related issues which are related to these points. They're both about language. One about teacher-student interaction, the other one about developing young people's Rsc skills. And I think I don't know if you have the expression in Norwegian, but we say the two sides of the same coin, yeah? Because you can't really take account of one without the other, and they're both to do with language. And this is because I think we know now much more than we did when I first began my research as a PhD student so many years ago, and even, say, just 20 years ago. We know much more about the importance of language and communication for the processes of cognitive development and the processes of learning. We really do. Vygotsky, who we all know, has been proved right in so many ways, and I think we need to take account of his very wonderful insights all that time ago. Language is the prime medium of education. If we didn't think that, we wouldn't do things like this. We also know that it is the way, it's the prime medium of the social construction of knowledge. Again, why would we have events like this if we didn't believe that? It's a case of what can we do about it? And we also know that in children's development, language is much more integrated with cognition and with cognitive development than people used to think. Steven Pinker is wrong, basically, a lot of things. Sometimes at Harvard they get some things right, but not that. So I'll talk about both of these things. So to put this into a question, first of all then, what evidence do we have that the quality of talk between teachers and students affects the quality of education? Well, research on this has been going on for quite a long while. It really only got going in the later part of the last century. And it became much more easy to do once we could video easily and record sound. Before that, it was very difficult. And what we initially found as the basis for this was what most teacher-student interactions like. And this example from some research in England, but I could pick quotes from almost anywhere in the world to say this. We know that most teacher-student interaction has a certain rather rigid form in which the teacher asks lots of questions which are just requiring a specific answer, or they do a lot of what I'm doing now, which is just talk. Okay. We know that this is the dominant form throughout the world. Classrooms, I've been in classrooms all over the world. They're more similar than different. There are some interesting differences, important interesting differences. But as a group of social environments with a specific language genres, they are more similar than different in many ways. So we know most of it is like that. We also know from a lot of research what researchers think can make it better. Here's again, I can just pick one example. I could pick lots, but I haven't got time. Here's some research that these people in America did about talk that was useful for literacy development. Okay? They suggest that one of the good things teachers can do is what they call reformulate and summarize what students say, which provides an opportunity for other students to build on these ideas. So they hear something a student said and they put it back out for consideration and hear what other students say. So they don't just say, yes, that's right, and move on. And they encourage students to put the main idea into their own words. They could have said as well, which is a useful thing, they also encourage students to begin to put their ideas into the discourses of the subjects. As Jay Lemke, who is a very eminent science educator, has said, science education should make students fluent speakers of science. And he's right. So we want, through the process of education, students to use language to represent their own ideas to the teacher, who can then hear what they think, but also the students need to be encouraged to start to put their own ideas into the target discourse of the subject or the topic or whatever that they're studying. And this is an important one, that teachers don't just take a right answer and say yes, or a wrong answer and say no, somebody else. They try and get students to reason with language. And this is where the two sides of the coin come in, as I will show you later. Because by getting them to reason with language, you're getting them to develop their powers of reasoning. And why questions are a good idea. So this is just one example from literacy education. I could pick examples from science, maths education. It would equally apply. We know lots of things like this. In my own research that I did with Sylvia Rojas Drummond in Mexico and in the UK, we found these results in both countries over a series of studies that have continued for some years. And these are just a rather more abstract way of saying the same thing that Wolf and Co. were saying before. That the teachers aren't just using questions and answers to test, to assess immediate recall and ideas from students, but they're using it as a sequence to guide the development of children's understanding. That's the Vygotskian notion, that the adult leads the child through language into new areas of understanding. And this is an important one, but a controversial one with some people, that they teach not just subject content, but also skills in solving problems and making sense of experience. So these are the things that many people would argue are more important for the future of many children than the actual content. The actual problem-solving process is probably more useful to learn than necessarily specific content about some subjects. But they're not either-ors, they're not choices. It's not a choice between subject content or problem-solving skills. It's a false choice if people think of it that way. And generally, the teachers we found were most effective are those who didn't know they were Vygotskians, but they were. That they were treating learning as a social communicative process. and sometimes without even realizing that they were. And so a lot of the research we've done, myself and colleagues and other people, has not been academics going out there and saying to teachers, no, stop that, you should do this. It's been saying, what do good teachers do? How can we distill the essence, the principles and practice of very good teachers, and then spread that? Because some people are naturally very good teachers. Some people are naturally good speakers. Some people are very good listeners. But we're not all. That doesn't mean we can't change and we can't become better at any of those ways of using language. We can. We are not stuck in the way we start off. So that's why educational research really needs to make these things clear. Not to impose these false ideas or alien ideas, I should say, on teachers, but to share with them what their colleagues, some of them, have already discovered. So, from a whole range of research, we can construct what my colleague Christine Howe has called a dialogic ideal of how language should be used in the classroom. One of the things there, and this has largely come from research in science education, from Phil Scott and people like that, and Eduardo Mortimer, but not just, is balance authoritative talk with more dialogue. Authoritative talk is like I'm doing now, I guess, where I'm telling you things I hope you'll find useful and relevant. And you're trusting me in my authority as a researcher to be right. Teachers need to do that. It's not true that they don't need to do that. It's vital. They won't get that knowledge, authoritative knowledge, from anybody else in their lives to do with science, history, languages, whatever. But a good teacher will ideally balance that with interaction in which the students' ideas are heard and they learn to speak, become fluent speakers of science or literature or whatever. And that they don't just ask the typical teacher question of, guess what's in my head? Yes, no. They actually use questions which encourage students to take more extended turns in which the teacher realizes what the students think. In some research we did in Singapore, the teachers found that a great insight when they were able to see what the students thought in physics education, this was, in secondary school. The teacher said, oh my God, I've been teaching them that for 6 weeks and they still think that? I will change completely the next lesson I do. And in the next lesson she said, you don't understand, so listen this lesson. And they all thought, yes, because the exams were coming, they all did listen. So it's a balance of authoritative talk with dialogue, hearing what the students think, and then, as that teacher did, use direct instruction contingently. She said, I now know what you don't understand. So now I will tell you, in a clear way, I hope, what you need to know. She didn't just begin. If you just listen to that lesson that she made then on its own, without knowing the history, you'd have thought, oh, this is a teacher who just goes into classrooms and speaks and tells students things. But there was a history where she found out from them taking extended turns what they didn't know, and she could design her talk to meet those needs. And the other thing is that we found it's generally been accepted that if you strategically integrate teacher-led activity with collaborative activity, as we're going to do today, we are practicing what we preach, as we say. You use both forms of learning, peer-based learning and teacher-led learning. And this is just a small selection of the research that suggests that this is good. So, okay, it all seems quite clear, doesn't it, in some ways? It's not that simple, is it? I mean, I know many of you, most of you here are educational researchers, and you'll appreciate that the picture is not quite so clear and simple as that. So on the one hand, people like Clark, Pauli, Resnick, and Penstein Rose, can summarize what they think is the situation in this way, that there are many studies on talk and learning, and they've shown what I've just said before. And this helps both their learning and reasoning development. Okay, this is basically what I've been leading up to saying. However, it isn't quite so simple. If you look in the literature, if you look at what's available online, if you look at many of the opinions that teachers themselves will put in blogs, and what some politicians, certainly in the UK, put forward, you'll find that that isn't necessarily the conclusion that all are drawing. For example, on the other hand, Donnelly here, it should say 2014, not 1014. It's quite new, really. And what Donnelly says was, well, look, China does very well in these tests. Certainly in Britain, we've been bringing Chinese teachers over to teach this mastery education style of teaching in maths. It seems that we've been misguided in abandoning the traditional teacher-directed method of learning, where the teacher spends more time standing at the front of the class, directing learning and controlling classroom activities. So is there a conflict here? You would think so if you read some of the things that are available online that people put up there. I don't think that's true. I think what we often get, and certainly often when education becomes discussed in political circles, what you get are false dichotomies. Okay? It's suggested that it's either one thing or another. In the UK, we've our ministers saying that group work's a waste of time. The teacher should be teaching the children, not letting them talk and say silly things to each other. Or they've said, no, the teacher shouldn't be letting the children speak or hearing what they say. They should be instructing them. And you will sometimes get these traditional or progressive pedagogies being offered as choices in discussions, in debates, in the media, and so on. Certainly in the popular press, it's a common, even today, still common kind of press discussion. Should it be traditional Chinese-style education, or should it be progressive, European-style education? And it's just nonsense. We don't have to teachers don't need to be one or the other. All the research suggests that all of those things are important, and you don't just have to do one. You can balance being a source of information and authority with being a facilitator and a guide who fosters thinking. And sometimes, as I hope is at least the case now, sometimes it's not a bad thing to just sit and listen. You do learn something, and then you can become active participants and talk about it and say what I say is right, wrong, or whatever. But it's not a choice. So I think we have to always, when we're dealing with the media, with political policymakers or whatever, and the general public, parents or whatever, if you're a teacher, to resist these false dichotomies. It's a complete red herring. I don't know if you have that expression in Norwegian. A red herring means something that's we should not spend time on. I don't know what the origin of that is. Interesting. Fishing, obviously. Must be a Norwegian equivalent. And as Donnelly himself says, the problem arises when teachers and teacher education academics, as Donnelly says, privilege one particular approach to the detriment of the others. Well, Donnelly's got a particular line to sell on this. That's not even really true. It's not particularly teachers and teacher education academics. It's more usually politicians and the press who do that than us. And it's not one particular approach, because those they don't have to be two approaches. They're strategies that you can integrate in your practice. So we should resist that very strongly. So that's one problem we have in disseminating useful knowledge. We're going to get this kind of, this unfortunate false dichotomies, which we have to resist. And the other thing is, well, how confident, they might say to us, are you about what you know? Can we really conclude this from educational research? Well, some people point out that there have been no really large-scale studies of the direct impact of teacher styles on learning outcomes. And in the UK, and to some extent in the US, I don't know if it's happened here, this has been partly people saying, because the studies are all small-scale studies, they tend to be intense, small-scale studies with a few teachers, a few schools. Well, you know, they always compare it with medical research, you know, where you've got hundreds at least of people who are either given the drug or not given the drug. And they sort of, they compare it with that. And there have been no randomized controlled intervention studies, RCT studies of teachers' pedagogic styles of language use of such a scale that they can show strong statistical effect sizes on learning outcomes. That's one of the things Christine Howe and Gillian Aberdeen concluded from their review. Well, to some extent that's true. There haven't been very many of those very large-scale studies. There is one being done at York now, an RCT study of the effects of language in primary schools on children's learning by Robin Alexander, Frank Hardman at York. I was talking to Frank recently. That's finishing it within the next year. So there are some. But I even think this is something we've got to be very careful about accepting this kind of criticism that's made of educational studies. Because there have been lots of studies. The fact that they've not been that particular model is in fact not necessarily, I think, the whole answer. And I think it's really worth questioning this. We have a funding agency, which I've had some money from, called the Educational Endowment Foundation in the UK, and they've been insisting that all their studies are RCT studies. And if you look on their website, you'll see they show the results of all the studies they've funded. And almost all have really small effect sizes. And so they're forced to conclude that we don't know. You know. But I think that's because they have been falsely led into thinking there is one research methodology that should be applied across all fields of knowledge, and including education research. And I don't think it's true. I don't think RCT studies are the gold standard. If you look at people looking at just at those studies, not in education, you'll find that Ginsberg and Marshall, for example, say of 23 of 27 studies, because of the money, this is the funding model, because they're only given a 3-year grant, as we all are, nearly, the implementation of the intervention was only in the first year. And yet a curriculum can take longer than that to change. Likewise, this is somebody writing more about studies in economics and changing behavior in that way, that it's hard to justify them if you don't just believe like a mantra that these are the real scientific method, because there are so many things wrong with them. There are other methods, as they say, that have better other forms of validity. From the research we did in science education, we carried out an RCT study called the Episteme Project in recent years, for which we got very small effect sizes, trying to change the way teachers talked with students and how they work with students in science education. And I think I can explain why we didn't get better results. I think it was the design of the study. This is one reason, if you do RCTs. We had 2 groups of teachers, right? One lot who came to our training days and were told and encouraged and taught how to be more dialogic in the way I described earlier with their students, okay? So we had a large group. This is on about 26 schools, so we're talking about, again, nearly 100 teachers. They were learning how to become more dialogic, okay? In the control group, we were randomly assigned. They were told, you're not in the study, I'm afraid, this year. You volunteered. You're actually the control lot. At the end of it, we'll give you the same training, but we're going to just observe you in your classrooms without any training. So what happens? Okay, some of these teachers come along, maths and science teachers, to the training days. Some of them think, wow, this is great. Some of them think, wow, this is great, but they don't really understand what they're meant to change. and so they don't change. Others come along and think, I don't think much of this, and I've got my children's exam results to think of. I'm going to go on doing what I always did. So in the experimental group, we had some teachers who really enacted the intervention faithfully, some who didn't because they misunderstood the principles, and there were some who just rejected it, and they were in the experimental group. In the control classes, control schools, I know this for a fact, some of the head teachers said, well, we're only the control schools, but we know what they're looking for, so we're not going to show that we're no good. We're going to do the dialogic stuff, because we don't want to be shown up by those other schools. So they made real efforts to be dialogic. So what you got was a complete mix across the two groups of teachers who were very dialogic and teachers who were not. They weren't all in the experimental group. That's a function of RCTs. And I know from talking to medical colleagues at Cambridge that they also accept that RCTs now don't work perfectly. One of them was telling me they were looking at research for the Ebola virus, on a vaccine for the Ebola virus, treatment in Africa, in Ghana. And he said, well, it looked like a straightforward study, but when we actually wondered why we weren't getting very good results, we found out on practice it wasn't working like that. They said, like, for example, some of the intervention studies, intervention patients were in difficult areas in which there was terrorist action. So the people who were going out to do the injections would go out and then say, we're not going there, and come back and say, yeah, we did it. And they didn't do it, right? And yet there were some of the people who were in the control groups in the city who had access to money said, on the black market, there's a virus, there's an injection going, you can get us it, here's some money. So some of the control people getting the injection and some of the people in the intervention group weren't getting it. So, and they've said they realize that you've got to have complex interventions. You can't just have a single variable and assume that all the confounds are controlled for, because there's always other confounds, other variables. You've got to accept the reality. So I think we have to argue as education researchers that RCT, that is not necessarily the best research paradigm always for evaluating educational practice, and that methods like ethnography and observational comparisons, more small-scale interventional studies, certain other forms of disseminating knowledge, getting teachers involved in designing the particular pedagogic inventions and implementing it themselves. There are lots of other methods, action research. Some of those are probably better for really understanding what goes on in education. And we shouldn't be brainwashed into thinking that RCTs are the answer, when I don't think they are. Okay, that's my rant, as I think I could call it. We're doing a study now, which I won't talk about in much detail, in which we are doing an observational non-interventional research study with 80 teachers, in which we are simply trying to relate the relative incidence of some of those those actions that associated with a dialogic ideal form of dialogue. We're seeing if we can relate how often teachers do those to the progress children make. And how that is relevant for teacher education, as the minister said earlier. So you can, if you just Google classroom dialogue in Cambridge, you can find out a bit more about that, but I won't go much into that now. Okay, I want to say something now about this other topic. How am I doing? Right, better stop soon. This is the other side of the coin. What we know from a range of subjects now, we know that language, as I said earlier, is an integrated function of the social brain. It's not a separate kind of cognitive faculty that's kind of added on in the way that the sort of Chomskyan influenced Steven Pinker model of language as this sort of separate thing. It's not. It's very integrated. I have a whole talk about that, which I can't do now. And we know that the Vygotsky model is essentially right. That's how humans learn. Humans learn through interactions with others. That's what we're designed to do. That's why we're not hardwired with lots of instincts, because we don't need to be. We can learn from each other and progress at a rate that animals who were tied to instinctive changes in their behavior take thousands, if not millions of years to make changes. And we also know that children's out-of-school languages vary considerably. And because language is so important, that means they're getting different opportunities for development, depending on their out-of-school backgrounds. And we also know that these things are important for the future of young people's lives. So just to say a bit more, this is an article from a British newspaper. I don't know why they put George Clooney up there, except probably because he's a good speaker, I don't know. And his wife's very good as well. And as it says there, this is a summary of some recent results, that 5-year-olds who can speak well do better in exams at 11. We've known this kind of thing for a while. Hart and Risley from 1995 in the United States, that's a summary of what they found. What they essentially were saying is, if you just go in a preschool child's home and record the amount of talk they're involved in, just the amount, you can make quite a good prediction about how they're going to be doing when they're about 11 or 12 at school. If you look at the quality, the nature of that talk, you can make an even better prediction. And this other research, Roy and Co. is from the UK, is very similar. And what we know then is that if those children's destinies are not going to be fixed, they've got a second chance. And the only second chance is their teachers. That's the only, otherwise they're on a trajectory, on a set of tram lines that they can't get off. So school ought to be doing this about their spoken language development. We also know from lots of economic workforce reviews, this is a UK one, but I can find them from all over the world, that we know that these are the sort of skills that many employers want in post-school life. So education should be preparing people for these. And of course we do know, don't we, as well, that in a democratic society, we want these kind of things to be important, and for people to be able to understand those things in self-expression, and to work with others to solve problems. I could have added to that people ought to be critically aware of how people do these things, how they express their ideas, and so on. On the Cambridge University website today, there's actually a little article by me on along with 7 other people from Cambridge about the debates between Trump and Clinton, and about how they're not a good model for how one should necessarily work out what are the best ideas. But that's how life is, and education doesn't necessarily prepare people to be critically aware of how spoken language is used in the world around them. And this is a report that Sten and others were responsible for putting together, and this is what they've concluded for Norway. That there is a clear relationship between people's social and emotional competencies and how they succeed later in life. And they say, should any generic competencies be given more prominence in school curricula, such as critical thinking, creativity, collaborative skills, complex problem solving, and scientific thinking? And I would say yes. But what I would say, and they essentially do say this in a different way in the report, but I would say that little list at the end, critical thinking, creativity, complex problem solving, collaborative skills and scientific thinking, the key to all of those is language development. It's not that you teach those things and they get good at language. It's that you teach them how to use language and they get good at those things. So if you teach spoken communication skills, how to reason with language, how to work collaboratively with language in school, those are the outcomes. So I think we don't want social and emotional education. We want language education, and you'll get social and emotional competence as a result. And yet, what can we say? In most schools, in most countries, I know this from looking at the research, are children taught how to make spoken presentations to audiences? Tell me if you think this applies in the schools you know in Norway. To engage in reasoned debate, to contribute confidently to class discussions. Not just encouraged, taught how to do it. Not just asked to make spoken presentations, but taught how, in the way they're taught how to read or to do maths or science. Are they taught how to work well in groups, not given the opportunity to work well in groups, but taught how to do it? Because they won't have learnt that anywhere else. And will they understand the difference between how you can talk usefully in a group and how you can make a presentation, and how talking to your friends outside is different than working to solve a specific problem in a work-related situation? Many people, adults, don't know that either. And I think we really need to treat this as a much more serious issue than it has been so far. It's a topic which I think has come of its time, and I think there is a lot more research that helps us to understand it. The answer, of course, is it's not happening anywhere much. And that's a shame. It's a tragedy for many children and for society in general. And there's no reason not. We know ways of teaching those things, just as we know how to teach long division or a foreign language. Well, it's not like we're ignorant of how to do it, but it doesn't happen hardly anywhere. There are some places that's doing it. Here's one school that we've been working with on a research project in England. You might want to just Google School 21, and they put speaking at the heart of everything they do. They teach all subjects through it. It's in a deprived part of London with a very difficult, many immigrant children, many children from white, working class, relatively deprived backgrounds, and yet they're achieving very good results. Ofsted is the Office of Educational Inspection in the UK. They're the inspectors of schools, is Ofsted. And this is what they found. Extraordinary skills they found the teachers are developing in that school. And it's an unusual school because it's outside the national curriculum, which doesn't have speaking and listening, or Rsc, as a main topic. They're able to do it. There are schools elsewhere. There's one in Singapore, I know, which is doing the same thing. But they're isolated. And yet the results they get are terrific. We work with them on a thing we call the Rsc Skills Framework, in which this is a very brief summary. It's all online, and this is an article that's in Learning and Instruction, just coming out. But it's online. If you Google Rsc Framework, Cambridge, it'll come up. And we're able to specify the range of skills that children should be developing to cope with spoken language across a range of situations. It's a bit more complicated than that, but the idea is it makes it clear what otherwise was just a muddle for teachers and children about what they were meant to be learning and how they can learn it. I haven't got time to go into detail about it, but that's what we've done. So if you're interested, have a look at that. And what we've also done is set up a new centre at Cambridge, which is a study centre at my college, which is Hughes Hall, that I'm the director of. And the aim of this is to bring together people who are concerned with this topic in developing skills in using talk effectively, not just in school, but in other areas of social life, in social care, in medical education, in creative settings such as design studios. We've done some research on musicians rehearsing together and how they use talk and how you can use it more effectively. And what we're doing is trying to gather and disseminate results of research which is relevant to understanding Rsc. Rsc is this word that was invented in the 1970s by Andrew Wilkinson in the UK, meaning to try and give spoken language education the same status as literacy and numeracy. And so that's why we're using this word. It's not a common word, but it fits what we want to know. And we're putting on conferences and training events. And the other thing we're doing is lobbying, trying to influence policymakers with a whole range of other people about the importance of it and how it should be given more attention. And in fact, today, you'll be glad to know I made this choice, perhaps. Well, you might be, you might not. But the other place I could have been today is the House of Lords, right? Drinking wine, probably by now. In the House of Lords. No, it's a bit early, isn't it? Because there's a launch of this publication called Speaking Frankly, which I'm part of, in the House of Lords today, to promote the case for Rsc education. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do and trying to make a big push on. And I hope you will support me and other people in trying to make this argument that spoken language education is one of the aspects of 21st century education that needs to be taken much more seriously everywhere in the world. That's my email if you want to get in touch. That's the college. Look, we do get snow there sometimes. And please do get in touch if you do. I've put lots of references on the PowerPoint, so if it can be circulated later, you can follow up anything I've said. And I think I've run out of time, so I'll stop now. Thank you very much.